The purpose of Wealth Talk is to educate, inform, and hopefully entertain you on the subject of building your wealth. Wealth Builders recommends you should always take independent financial, tax, or legal advice before making any decisions around your finances.
Welcome to episode 158 of Wealth Talk. My name is Christian Rodwell, the Membership Director for Wealth Builders, and I'm joined today by our founder, Mr. Kevin Whelan. Hi, Kevin.
Hi, Chris. Good to be with you again in interesting times. Bank of England just put the base rate up, so it doesn't bode well for those who are borrowing money, particularly those people looking to just get on the property ladder, right? Because there's definitely the warning signs of something coming, and if I get a chance, I'll talk about that.
Yeah. So today we've invited one of our members, who is Fabio Frisenda, to talk about a particular kind of strategy that he's been looking at recently. And I think in these times, Kevin, we have a lot of conversations, don't we, with members who become a bit frustrated. Perhaps they've been, following something that's been working quite well for a long period of time. And then the economic climate changes and they start worrying a little bit and things are not quite as easy. And this is where you have to start thinking outside of the box and looking for new opportunities sometimes.
I think always. I mean, irrespective of, we call it the economic wind, okay? So when it comes to the same economic wind blowing on all of us, it's the set of the sail that determines our success. And I want to reframe Jim Rohn's words. I saw you smile there, Jim Rohn. He's a big fan of Jim Rohn, you listeners out there. But always good for a quote is Jim Rohn. But I would say it's all about distinctions, So just as you put your hand on the tiller and you're tweaking your direction into the wind, the same thing applies when you're building wealth. So you might start off with a strategy in mind, but then you need to flip and change direction. And this is really important, Chris, to recognize, because I think many people who start to build their wealth, and they have a particular strategy. I do stock market, or I do investing, or I do property. And if I do property, I do HMOs, or if I do property, I do development. And they think about that process and don't realize often that you need to equip yourself with a holistic way of building wealth, so that the more that you can build a roundedness, a way to look at things from different angles, and that just means not just you being smarter, but surrounding yourself with other people who can help you. And then because you can see 360, if you imagine, you're driving, or you've got your hand on a tiller, if we're going to use that analogy, you're kind of looking forward, but you need constantly to be looking 360 around you, because then you can change direction if something's coming. And that's what Fabio's done. And I think making distinctions is not a DIY activity. You've got to be working with other people, talking to people, connecting to people, because you'll see what other people are doing. And, Fabio's a experienced guy in his own right. Is fundamentally, if you said to Fabio, what is it you do? He would say, I'm a property developer, but he's not. He makes money from property opportunities. And in the interview, he'll reveal kind of what he's doing. But the backdrop to all of this, Chris, is fundamental, because if you think about what's going on in the world, and I've often got a new quote of my own, which is the new order is disorder. It's all over the place. So you've really got to be fleet of foot when it comes to your finances. And one of the ways to do that is to understand what's going on. Understand where you are, understand the context. So just like a sat nav is useless. A map is useless unless you know where you are. And right now we've got a bubbling cauldron of things that are going wrong, Chris, that are not good, right? And here's the summary of all of them. And there's a word that summarizes all of that I haven't heard for 30 years, right? I haven't heard this word brought up, but I'm hearing it being brought up now. And it's this: when you get a heady mix, a horrible mix of rising prices, double-digit inflation, when you get consumer demand still high, supply side problems everywhere. You and I were laughing when we were meeting recently, and I was thinking about getting a new car for my wife. 14 months, they said it's going to take to get right. That's supply side problems. Fabio will talk about supply side problems in property, right? So we're now starting to list these things. And then when you get interest rate rises, right? Oops, we just had one today. And you get a combination of all those things. And the OECD, the kind of governing body who talk about economic development, saying the UK is going to be the lowest growing country in the world next year. Now, that means when you combine a stagnant economy together with all those other things I mentioned, plus double-digit inflation, that combined horribleness is called stagflation. Right? Nothing to do with bulls and bears. Stagnant economy plus rampant inflation and all those other issues, stagflation. Now, usually there's one other thing that's in the mix, which is unemployment rising. But we're seeing employment unrest. We're seeing strikes. We're seeing challenges. We're seeing double-digit inflation, people wanting pay rises, and the companies can't afford to do it. So if companies get to a place where they simply don't invest money anymore, they see the future as uninspiring, worthwhile, actually cutting and going backwards, retreating into a shell, then we're going to have a nightmare scenario. And stagflation is almost upon us. And the only way the government knows how to handle stagflation is rising interest rates to quell and dampen demand. So that's the economic background in which we're headed. So what's happening is a storm ahead, and we've got to navigate through that storm. Unfortunately, we're well positioned at Wealth Builders because we understand that. How many people, have you heard that word before, Chris? Stagflation?
Yeah, I have, but not for a while. Yeah.
Now, the last time we had it really was the 70s when we had the oil embargo, OPEC countries, putting a limit on the amount of supply of oil. And that's a big challenge there. So consequently, I think we've got to manage our own personal economy and not worry about the wind. And Fabio is going to really talk about what he's doing to bolster and to boost his profits without just putting all of his eggs in that very same basket. Absolutely,
yeah. And it's all about being proactive, not passive when these circumstances arise. So let's go to our conversation with Fabio, and then I'm sure we'll be back to debrief the lessons afterwards. So here's our guest for today, Fabio Frisenda. Fabio, welcome to Wealth Talk today. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Christian. Yourself?
Yeah, really, really good. Thanks. It's a pleasure to have you on, Fabio, member of the WealthBuilders Academy. And today we're talking all about planning gains and uplift on development sites. And this is an area that you've got a lot of experience with, Fabio. So perhaps let's begin there. Tell us about how you got into development yourself.
Okay, so I've been in property for over 25 years. I started my career as an estate agent. So after, I would say, basically 15 years being an estate agent, having a business, I sold it. So to me was the natural progression getting into property development and construction. So obviously the first developments and deals were more flips, small planning gains. And then now we're doing, I would say, bigger planning gains and bigger sites. So, but yeah, that's the natural progression, and that's how I got into it. I was lucky; I was always into property. Yeah, I only know that. So there you go.
Yeah. And of course, we talk about multiple pillars, and property is definitely a popular pillar and one that's working well for you, Fabio. But at the moment, of course, we're going through some troubled times, sort of midway through 2022, and perhaps the landscape's changing a bit. And I know in particular, you've noticed that, there's real opportunity now around, getting planning gains. And just tell us a little bit about what actually gains are for someone who might not be, fully clear on that.
Okay, so what does that mean exactly, planning gain? Basically, it's an uplift between the site that you bought originally without planning, and because you took that site, either a plot of land or an old building that didn't have planning for residential, you put it through the process of getting planning. Once the land or the building is valued after the process, meaning once you've got planning, well, there's a big difference. And hopefully each time we do this, there's a margin profit. So I'm just going to take an example. You can buy a site for £1 million, for instance, and if you get, let's just say, 25 apartments, obviously these numbers, would make sense that on a different site. So it's just about, once you've paid your planning costs, maybe that site might be worth 1.4, 1.5, all depends on the site and on the areas. But that's the main idea of it, making money through getting planning approved and granted.
Right. And who is this suitable for in particular, Fabio?
For everybody, I would say someone who wants to invest in time and learn. Obviously, when you start and you're not from a property world, you could be simply an investor. And then I would advise, I would say investors to work with developers or people who do planning gains. So people like me, for instance. But I can also help people getting through that process because we've got a good team in place. So it is a good strategy because we know in property you've got different strategies on how to make money, and planning gains is one of them.
Yeah, and are you seeing this becoming more prevalent at the moment? And if so, is there any particular reason why, do you think?
Yeah, one of the main reasons is the risk of construction and building these sites because of the inflation. We've seen in the past year and with the pandemic, prices of material have gone up. Construction, the quotes that we used to do 2 years ago are nowhere near than the quotes that we do today. They're probably 25% higher. The other element as well is Brexit, meaning that there's a shortage of staff and people willing to work in the construction world. So every reputable construction company or builder has always got work. So it's very, very difficult. I get clients ringing me and say, can you do this within the next month or two? I said, no, impossible. We just can't. We've got so much work, and with our own developments as well, and trying to work with subcontractors all the time, that's difficult. So planning gains take out the risk of construction.
Okay, so Fabio, there's several steps really that someone needs to be aware of, I suppose, if they're going to use this as a strategy. So do you think you could perhaps walk us through, what's the right thing to be looking out for at the beginning, all the way through to the actual sale? Yeah.
So basically, we are looking for sites with no planning whatsoever. So I'm not going to go in the ins and outs today of how to source these sites, but the steps are basically to start with my personal experience with a site that's got no planning whatsoever, is to start with a pre-app, meaning talking to the council. So obviously it's the planning consultant who would do that job, and you instruct him to do that. And then the council would come back with their opinion on the site saying, yeah, we would be in favour of residential, commercial, apartments, houses. And then from there, we can take steps to say, okay, have we got a good chance of getting planning approved? So that would be, to me, the first step.
Okay, great. And then just take us through what would
so the next step we'll see as well is that you do come across sometimes with sites that have got outline planning, which is not full planning, but basically it's in between the middle, saying, okay, the council has approved this scheme. If you apply for full planning, you've got 90% of chancing of getting it. So there are sites with that, what we call outline planning. The reason why vendors apply for outline, because it's much cheaper than full planning. And it gives them an indication, and it enables them to sell a site, basically, which is, I would say, a bit more than a site we've got nothing at all. So that's what vendors use at that planning. And obviously the developer would take this application to full planning, get all the surveys done, get everything that needs to be done with the architects, the planning consultant, and the council to be able to have planning granted. So that's outline planning. And then Obviously, full planning, that's where the goal is to take a site to full planning, meaning that you've got the right to build it once full planning is granted. So in terms of that, the costs are completely different and timescales are completely different. But these are, I would say, 3 points like pre-application, outline planning, and full planning.
Okay.
You can't do that on your own. However, even if you haven't got much experience in planning gains, the team should be able to do the job for you if you hire the right people, meaning the right architects, the right planning consultants mainly. And then they've got a team around them who will do all the surveys necessary on the site or the building to get it through planning. But that's mainly how I operate. Okay.
And then I guess we're looking at the costs as well.
Yes, so we were talking about the cost. Pre-app is according to different councils, it should be free, but sometimes ask you for a small fee, probably £1,000, £2,000, depending on the council. But some council, their pre-app advice is free, so that's good. Outland planning, you don't have to pay the fee to the council for £500 per dwelling. It's a smaller fee, so that's much cheaper. And then obviously you've got your architect fees and you've got your planning consultant fees with various surveys. The goal is to take it to full planning because that's what developers want. That's what gives the value to the site, basically. So the cost involved in that are £500 per dwelling. So let's just say you've got a site and you're planning to get a block of apartments of 20 apartments on it. That will cost around £10,000. That's the fee to be paid to the council. And then you got your architect fees. That's a quote. All architects work differently on a different basis. And then you got your planning consultant fees. So fees could vary on different sites, but we're talking about £20,000 to maybe £200,000 for bigger blocks of flats, like 100 units plus. So, but if you look at sites where I would say there's an average between 10 and 30 units, either houses or flats, it's not going to cost millions, 50, 60, 70K maybe, depending on the site and the surveys, we should be able to get it through. But the uplift, that's where the beauty of this is. Sometimes you can double, triple your money and your investment within the space of, I would say, 12 months to maybe if the site's a bit more complicated, maybe 15 months, 18 months of planning. There's companies out there and I would say specialized investors, all they do is just planning gates. They never build anything. They're just constantly with their team looking for sites without planning or without land planning, take it through the process of getting full planning and then just sell them on to property developers or other investors.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you for walking us through that. So it sounds like, no two sites are the same there. As you say, they can cost different amounts and certainly take different amounts of time. But, just for someone even just walking around their local area, right, it's just to start looking and start thinking. And these opportunities are probably all around once you know what to be looking at.
Yeah, we could probably do a different podcast just alone about how to source these sites. That would take. We could talk about that for a long time, but without going too specifically into the ins and outs. Yeah, you can get these sites through your network, agents, sourcers, architects, planning consultants, other developers as well who have got stock and they just don't want to build sometimes, and they say, look, we bought this unconditional, we just want to sell it on, and obviously you could probably negotiate an option or exchange contracts on different basis and take it through the planning process. So I would say it's really, really interesting. And especially in this climate, in terms of risk, it's less risky than doing full developments and building it yourself. Because like as we mentioned, you take out the risk of construction and delays and inflation and price of materials going up. So it's a tricky market at the minute.
Tell us a little bit more about your company and some of the projects that you're currently working on or ones that you're looking at to be doing in the future.
Yeah, so Investimo, I started this nearly 6 years ago. So So we started with obviously smaller projects, but we do now various things. We source for some of our good clients. We work with developers in terms of finding, I would say, sites. We work with housing associations where we work closely with them to find sites and build them, because I've also got Investimo Construction with a business partner, so we do the full package for investors, and also we develop ourselves. So some of the projects we've done a lot of conversions of buildings into, I would say, HMOs that we sold on to housing associations, but we also got developments of flats in the pipeline, planning gains, and a few sites that we just won, I would say, in London, where it's going to be big projects, 20, 30 million GDV plus. So it's going to be exciting for us for the end of this year and 2023 as well.
Excellent. Fabio, thanks so much for sharing with us today on Wealth Talk. Okay,
thank you, Christian. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so thanks to Fabio there for taking us through the process, really, of how to get an uplift on land, on a development opportunity. But let's head over to Trustpilot before we dive into the lessons that we learned there, Kevin. And I'm going to pull out a review that's come in about your book, actually. So this is from... no name on this review, just We Accommodate, a company name there. The Wealth Coach by Kevin Whelan and Bradley J. Sugars. Easily read narrative to provide a simple story-based overview of the steps and principles of wealth management. Well done to Kevin and Bradley for a well-crafted book.
Yeah, okay, well, that's short and sweet, and we're definitely getting the book out. The Amazon link will be out soon. Been getting some good reviews, so we've had some people reading the book in a group, like a book club, and then inviting me on to speak about the lessons, a bit like how we do this, Chris, which is kind of fun and interesting. Not with you, but with other people. But it's interesting, and I'm enjoying doing that. So if you've got a group of people and you'd like to do a book club where you can review books, not just my book, but any book, and start having discussions about that, we'd love to hear about that. So. Or even maybe there's a little idea for you to think about.
Yeah. Okay, so let's look at the strategy that Fabio talked us through there, how to make a planning gain or an uplift on a site. And we said just before the interview there, cost of materials are increasing. There's a shortage of people, and you have to start looking at other ways to generate income streams. And this, in some cases, can be a less risky strategy if you know what you're doing.
Well, everything's about knowing what you're doing. And if we went from a Jim Rohn quote to a Kevin Whelan quote to now a Warren Buffett quote, which is risk is when you don't know what you are doing. And the challenge here is, you can't do these things without knowing more. And that really means building a team or getting connected to a team, whether it's Fabio, but you heard him talk about architects, planning consultants, and of course, within Wealth Builders, we know many of those for those who are interested in connecting. And you've got to build a team. And you can also build a team of people looking for opportunities, because he talked about site finding as a rich and challenging game. And of course it is, because in property, the real value is on the buy. It's what you do at the beginning of finding the site is the key to all of this, because you can imagine a scenario of getting an uplift, making something more valuable, and that's what wealth is all about, isn't it? It's either creating flow of cash, creating a flow of capital. So this strategy is creating flow of capital, and then it's what you do with the capital that creates cash flow. So let's be clear, this is not a wealth building strategy from a cash flow point of view, but it's a capital flow point of view. Now, in order to do that, you need to understand the process, and the hardest part is the site finding. And I think even one of the ways just to even begin to think about it is to get curious. I think you mentioned walking about, so what about getting a bike and riding around your geographical area and looking for sight lines? So sight lines is if you see uneven heights, if you see a building that looks like there's space to the left or to the right or above or even, and we talked about in the past, Chris, down below, where we've seen London-based developers going into basements because it's so much easier to do that. So wherever you can see a north, south, east, west, a 360 point of view and uneven sight lines, that's one way to have a look at it. Just get curious, and then you can use tools and software like we talked in the past. We've talked about Nimbus, for example, Chris, and you could probably give a link to that podcast.
Sure.
When we talked about that. But, there are other site finding tools, and I'm talking to another guy who is very interesting called Charlie, who runs a business called Stacked. And we're going to talk a little bit further about that. So other tools are available. And the point is, though, you can look at a site and then immediately identify it and see whether or not anybody's applied for planning permission before, whether it was granted or not. You can go look at the council plan to see, what their plans are for certain sites and so on. And as Fabio said, you can get information from the council, often at free or very low cost. But how many people do that? They tend to see themselves in the property sector as looking for property online, Rightmove, websites from agents. That's not how you're going to discover this. This is you taking yourself out of that and looking more deeply into a niche. And I think the real value, and this is just to think about everything you do when you're building wealth, is like a value chain, So what's the first thing you do? What's the second thing? What's the third thing? What's the fourth thing? And each time you do something, you've got the capacity to increase value. And then you can decide, well, where do I want to capture that value? Where do I want to crystallize that value? Where do I want to take that value? And in some cases, you can do that even in your pension. So you can make a decision like this. You can look at a building. You could say, well, I'm going to buy the building with my pension and get planning permission and pay for the planning permission with your pension. You could sell it at that point, as an uplift and sell it to somebody else, or sell it to a developer, or you could do a joint venture with a developer. So you could do that joint venture outside of your pension. So you've got so many different ways to create value, but the key is to understand the steps in the journey. So finding property is number one. We talked about the pre-app, which is it likely something can happen? Then outline planning permission, then planning permission, then what do I do with it? And when you've got a developing company, or a development company rather, like Fabio, then, and many developers too, have a finite number of properties they can take on. Supply side challenges again. How many staff can you do? How many projects can you run at the same time? So some developers will find projects, but they don't have the capacity to develop. So they'll sell it to somebody else, either for cash or for a joint venture, cash to put money back in the bank account. And we recently spoke to one of our clients, Mark, who bought a building from a developer who didn't want to do it because they had too many other projects, and it was a great site that all the planning was done, all the work was done, everything was done, and they just bought it, and they want to do the development where somebody didn't. So this is where the collaboration comes in. What do you want to do? What is somebody else going to do? And you can work out how best to do that. And in Fabio's case, it's about not doing the development. It's about selling it to somebody else who will do the development because they're in a different position to you. And then you can capture that value, which can be a considerable uplift. Okay, you've got to put some money in up front, so you need some knowledge. There's going to be time lag. Could be 12 months, could be 18 months. So you've got to wait. And a lot of times with wealth building, you're waiting for something to happen. There's a lag time between doing something and getting the value. So you could be having multiple things like this. And as long as you've got a supply of money to do the planning, wait, you got to pay for the planning and then wait for the planning. And it doesn't have to be a lot of money. I know he talked about projects in the millions because he's very experienced, but you could do this at a much lower level and just have a few thousand out there. So you could easily add this to your strategy to give you a buffer. You could sell something and be a sourcer and then sell that to somebody else. or you could find people who are sourcing them who don't have the money if you've got money. See what I mean? This is all where you've got to work out where your own leverage is. And maybe you can remind people where they could find out about their leverage, Chris, on a previous podcast of finance, intellect or interest, relationship, systems, and time. And once you've worked out where you are, you can work out where this strategy fits in. And I think it could fit in for most people these days, because all you've got to do really at the beginning is start being curious about the layout of buildings around you.
Yeah. You brought a few things into play there, talking about multiple pillars. Of course, the Wealth Builders model is built around the 7 pillars. And you mentioned leverage, and we have many aspects of the wealth building process, which anyone who's new to the podcast may not be familiar with. So perhaps it's a good time for us to mention our next webinar, which we're holding next Tuesday evening, Kevin, on the 28th of June, where we're going to be talking through all 9 steps of our recurring revenue roadmap. And of course, Fabio is a member of the Academy as well. And we're going to touch on all of these key aspects of understanding what's the right pillar for you. How do you choose the best strategy based on your points of leverage? And then how do you turn the wheel of wealth to start generating either capital or cash flow? So if you're new, or if you just want to jump on and join us next Tuesday evening, then grab the link that will be in these show notes, click and register, and you and I, Kevin, will be there.
Well, look, I'm going to implore people to take some action now. You know, I said earlier on, we're heading for troubled times, as the song goes. There will be trouble ahead. I know I'm not a singer, so that's not part of my IP, Chris. I'm not going to get any royalties for that. There's trouble ahead. You need to plot your way through this. Otherwise, if you don't, you're going to be stuck, sitting, not knowing what to do, in a push-me, pull-you economy, being pushed by opinion, by being pulled by the weather, the economic weather, not knowing what to do. So being able to think, make distinctions, have a set of principles and strategies that work would be a very valuable addition rather than waiting. Because the last time we had stagflation, Chris, it took 10 years to come out of that. Now, if we get another decade like that, then too many of the people listening to this, it'll already be too late for them. And, you know, they'll get into the hokey cokey. Do you remember we talked about that? They'll go, oh no, I don't know what to do. So they'll jump from one thing to another, and often without information, just fear of not knowing what to do. Please get some principles, you know, learn the principles, apply the principles, and you'll be able to plot your way through this and build your wealth. And it's predictable. So that's what I'd suggest. Jump on the webinar, come and see what we do, and we'll help you carve a path through the troubled times ahead.
Yeah, so wherever you're listening to this podcast today, Spotify, Apple, just hit the show notes. You'll see the link to register for the webinar. It's completely free. We'll be starting at 7:30 p.m. in the evening, and we'll show you exactly our process for helping people move from financial insecurity through to financial independence.
And while, you know, Chris, we normally like to ask people to do a review, please don't do a review of my singing, right? Entirely inappropriate. We don't want any comments, anything like that. Just, you know, I'm having fun doing this. Look, do I look like I'm worried about being buffeted by what's coming? No, because financially, we can learn to become bulletproof. We can put a financial fortress around ourselves that keeps us protected. And that's the real skill. And we can teach you how to do that.
Yeah. So thanks again to Fabio for being our guest today. Thanks for listening. And Kev, we'll be back same time, same place next week.
Till then, my friend. See ya.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget that we are constantly updating our resources inside the Wealth Builders membership site to help you create, build, and protect your wealth. Head over to wealthbuilders.co.uk/membership right now for free access. That's wealthbuilders.co.uk/membership.